Welcome back to Leveraging Leadership, where we unpack the art of business leadership. I'm your host, Emily Sander, Chief of Staff turned Executive Leadership Coach. This show is all about finding your points of greatest influence and leveraging them to better serve those around you. My guest today is Alex Yaro. Alex, how you doing?
Very well. Good to be here, Emily.
Good to have you on. So let's just jump in. Can you give folks a quick background of yourself and how you got into your long career of mediation and now into conflict resolution?
You bet. Yeah. So I was born in Ukraine in a town called Lviv, and my parents were Jewish. So we left the Soviet Union due to persecution. And so even then, I sort of got the sense from my family system that there was going to be conflict in the system. You know, there were people who were with you or the people who were against you and so on. And then when I came to the United States, I had a whole different system of conflicts to navigate. I didn't know America. I didn't know how America worked. And my parents told me that I really kept quiet and didn't say anything for like 3 months until I guess I must have been absorbing it all. And then eventually, when I got to middle school, I started getting into conflicts of my own. So like one example of that is I didn't know anything about American football. So when I was picked to be on the team, my job was to count one Mississippi, two Mississippi. And I knew that Mississippi was a river in the middle of the United States. I had no idea why we were yelling at. And that went okay most of the time, except at some point I got past 7 Mississippi and then got into 8 Mississippi. And all the kids said, no, rush him, meaning that I was supposed to rush the quarterback. But I didn't know that. So I thought they meant Russian. They were making fun of me. So I didn't really understand that. So the kids got mad that I wasn't doing what I was supposed to, and they wanted to fight me. And I didn't really know how to deal with that. So I knew the word for tomorrow. So I said, fight? Okay, tomorrow. And they said, tomorrow. And then so tomorrow became tomorrow. And then I realized, I can use the power of language to resolve conflicts. And that is what started me along this journey that I eventually became a mediator. And I really took to that. And now I do a lot of work around executive coaching and how to deal with difficult personalities and how to lead people effectively.
Yes. And you kind of brushed over it, but mediation, you were like professor and you did kind of this illustrious kind of middle part of your career with that. Yes.
Yes. So in grad school, I saw a flyer that said free mediation training. And at that point, I didn't know what mediation was. I was interested in negotiation at the time and talking, but not necessarily, I didn't know what the process was. And I got a free training and I really took to it. And so there are some people, I think we maybe talked about this before. Some people have a talent for singing or playing the piano, what have you. And I don't have any of those. But for mediation, I discovered that was my talent, that I'm able to hear one person, understand their perspective, and then hear another person, understand their perspective, and sort of have a bird's eye view of what's happening. And then I'm able to feed it back to the people so they can understand how they play a role in this, and then hopefully coach them to resolution.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've heard you speak about is helping people understand how their actions impact others, which a lot of times people are like oblivious. They just they are unaware.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes they kind of have an inkling and they do it anyway, but I'm wondering kind of how that feeds into, in the business world when leaders or colleagues are doing a certain behavior. And it's like, you seem oblivious to the effect on the team here.
Yep. So I'll give you one example of this. This was a recent mediation that I had with 2 coworkers. One was the manager of the other. And so the president of the company called me in and said, I need help because I have these 2 valuable people. I think they're really great. They seem to really be at odds. And one person is thinking of quitting. Maybe both will quit. And I want the problem solved. I don't know what to do. So I spoke with each of them. And so each of them had a very different context of what was happening. So one person had been a long-time employee at the organization. And through a series of organizational shifts, she wound up being moved further and further away from where she was in the job that she liked. And her job was very sensitive, the one that she had before this current role. And so in her mind, she was always thinking about what is the least I can say to still do my job, not to betray confidences. And then she gets this new employee who has no idea about the organization and was promised that she would grow in the organization and do all these things. And so now the two of them are speaking, and they're speaking from entirely two different places. And so when the new person was complaining to me, she's complaining to me about a secretive, non-transparent manager, which is kind of true, but not because of anything personal, not because of anything she has against the new person, just because that's the way that she thinks. That's her context. And of course, when the new person gets this message, she feels, let's just say negatively toward the organization and toward the manager. And so once we are able to figure out their different contexts and their intentions versus their impact, then they really had one giant cathartic conversation. And from then on, they're fine because they're actually two really good human beings and two good employees.
And I find that a lot of times people will assume things and they have like this gap and void of information. So they'll fill it and they'll create a narrative in their head. And sometimes that's like kind of close to the truth. And sometimes it is like oceans away. And so I'm wondering, where does the step of let's identify the intention here, which you could still have issue with, right? Like you could, like, okay, I fully understand your intention.
Yep.
I hear you. I understand you. I'm going to repeat back what you said to make sure that you know that I understand. And I still disagree with that. But where is the step of let's just get our cards on the table here? What did you intend to do when you were doing this, this, and this?
Yeah. So here's what happens in our brain. We have a structure in our brain called the amygdala. So part of our limbic system, it's our animal brain, and it doesn't have language. It's just wired for threat detection. And it's very necessary to evolution. And it's less necessary to today's corporate environment. But it activates anyway. And because it's a more primal system, it activates before the language gets activated. So we sense something and our limbic system senses potential danger. And then our brain, our prefrontal cortex, tries to make sense of that messaging. What could it be? And that is when we start filling in the blanks with it could be that this person is bad and they're after me. It could be that I'm about to get fired, et cetera, et cetera. Then we start believing our own story because we heard it in our head. And so if that's what my brain is telling me, it must be true. And therefore, then we act on that experience. Of course, other people have a very different experience. And that is often where conflict happens.
Yeah. So how do you go about uncovering the intention? Just as like a baseline, hey, let's get like level set everyone. Let's actually talk about what we're talking about here. How do you kind of have that initial conversation?
Yeah. So first, I speak with each person separately so that there's no audience except for me. And I ask them to tell me the story from their beginning. And so I do that. And at a sort of at a simple level, I go and I ask each person that question, and everyone's beginning is often different. So there's missing
Ooh.
context. So that's the first piece of that. Then I also watch their body language to see how are they acting as they're telling me the story. What is really salient to them, and then I ask the question of what are they not saying, and or how come they're using that particular word. And I would ask that, how come you're using the word betrayed? Because I hear that this person did this. What makes it a betrayal, for example?
Mhm.
And then they tell me, oh, they're happy to tell me what makes it a betrayal. And often what makes it a betrayal is that this act is similar to another act I had had in my past when I classified that as a betrayal, which may be a betrayal or it just may be a false positive. And so we want to ask that question. So
Yep.
that's how I typically uncover it. By having these conversations of asking, how do you know this is true? What makes you say that? How come using that particular word? And I don't challenge in the sense of telling them this is the wrong word by any means, but I want to know more about how come they made that choice. And that's how the story comes out.
Yeah. Okay. And so you have the conversation with the two separate people. And then my next question is around when you get the two people together. And just to set context for this, we're speaking with a lot of chiefs of staff here who are doing kind of a lot of these um, brokering conversations or building bridges or mediation conversations with C-suite executives, with principals, with all these different players in the organization. So I'm imagining someone saying like, yes, I have these two folks who don't see eye to eye. They're at odds with each other. Okay, so I have the first two separate conversations, and then how do I actually bring them to resolution? So, what would be the next step?
Yeah. So that last conversation is in some ways the easiest because all the hard work is done beforehand. And those separate conversations sometimes take several passes. So I would have one conversation with one person, then another, then we do it again and maybe do it again after that. And the reason I do that is one for horse trading. So one person tells me, well, I'm willing to concede this point, but then I would need these assurances. So then I go back to that person and say, how do you respond to that? By the way, it's very important when I do that to ask for permission so that people know that I am revealing information that they are okay with me revealing, and I'm
Sure.
not saying anything that they decide is confidential. But and by the way, sometimes that's a negotiation where they would say to me, no, don't tell this person, and then I might have to ask, well, if I don't tell them, how will they know this is what you want? And then I get that release. Fine, you can tell them that sort of thing. But so I have those conversations, and by the time we're done, I actually want to set the stage for a reconciliation conversation. And what I say is something like, so Emily, I am going to say this. Hello, we're going to speak with Alex and Emily. And what I would like you to do then is maybe, because Alex needs to hear you say that you understand that he didn't mean any harm by this. So I would appreciate it if you said that. I think that would make the conversation easier. So that you would agree to do that. And then you would say, well, maybe then, but Alex would need to hear an apology from Alex for treating me the way he did in that meeting. And then I make sure that Alex knows that when Emily says this, I'm going to cue Alex and say, Alex, and how do you respond to what Emily's saying? And Alex, by that point, knows that he will give an apology. And if he doesn't, I will redirect him. So that because it's important then maybe for you to hear that piece. And I know that. So I'm going to make sure you hear it. And that's how the conversation goes. And once we're past those first few scripted moments, usually then people relax and the conversation really goes.
Okay, so there's a bit of framing that goes into it where, like, let's just make sure this gets kicked off in a productive way, and so you're doing kind of little staging there, and then do you kind of step back and let the two people have just whatever organic conversation unfolds, or are you still kind of guiding the conversation in a general direction?
It depends on the goal and depends on what the people are doing and whether or not they're sometimes unearthing new old wounds that I hadn't heard of. And then I would say, well, that's something we want to go into doing. What I want to be careful, and the word you use is productive conversation. I certainly agree with the sentiment of that. What I want to do in that conversation is not have my own agenda of what productive means, unless I'm a principal, but rather ask the two people, what is your agenda for a successful conversation? Okay, Alex, you want to hear Emily say that she's going to, do this and this and this. Okay. And then what are you willing to do in return? Okay. Emily, same thing here. And usually then I would remind both people, I hear you both saying what you really want is figure out a way to collaborate on this project. So how is this conversation helping us toward that goal? Or do you have a different goal? And usually that type of framing prompts people to say, all right, that's right. Okay. We are heading down toward that goal.
And one thing that I've done in the past as chief of staff is identify the overall objective, and normally that's the same thing for all parties involved. So let's say I'm talking with I'm just going to make like a CFO and a chief revenue officer, and then I'm chief of staff, and so we're all trying to grow revenue for the company. This is just a basic example, right? So like we all want that, and that's very important to us for various reasons, but we all want that. So laying out, hey, I'm trying to get us to this. Like, I want us to be able to grow revenue. CRO, I want you to be able to look good in front of your team and in front of the board. CFO, I want you to be able to report on X, Y, and Z to your team and your stakeholders, et cetera. Is there a place for like, hey, like, let's identify the objective or goal we're trying to get to and have some commonality in that? Is there a place for that? Or is it really, you tell me what you're trying to get to, and then second person over here, you tell me what you're trying to get to, and we'll try to find a common path to something in the same general direction.
So yes, yes, and yes. For sure there is a place for a common goal, and in a role of of a chief of staff or COO, you want to say, this is what I say from my seat as our goal. Do we align on this? And usually the devil's in the details a little bit, because as long as you're all aligned on the revenue target of 10% growth, let's say everyone says yes, 10% is our number, then it's okay. Then somebody might say, well, it's 10% risk adjusted. Okay, so what
Mm.
does risk then mean? And then people can have different definitions around that. And that is where usually you have differences of perspective. And the question is, are these mutually exclusive or are they complementary?
Hmm.
And if they're complementary, let's discover that. That's a win-win solution. And if they're mutually exclusive, then let's do some kind of a negotiation to see what is acceptable to the group. And that is appropriate tension. And I would say this is good tension that we're having. Let's smile and deal with it. This is not a personal thing. And usually when people kind of they relax into it, they realize like, oh, this is okay. Like we actually get paid to have this tension. That's fine. So that the other person isn't bad. They're just doing a different job.
Yes. So you kind of segued into productive conflict or whatever words you want to use there. But there is, there's healthy stress and then there's destructive stress. There's healthy conflict. There's destructive conflict. And I'm wondering, one of my goals when I play this mediation role, not officially like you, but this unofficial mediation role as chief of staff was to get these two team members to be able to speak constructively without me in the room.
Mhm,
Like they need to be adults and like be able to have these conversations because they're key players in our organization and they just have to have conversations. That's just part of the nature of the business.
mhm.
So part of my goal was how do I make it so they can go off and do this on their own and have those conversations where there is tension and they are butting heads, but it's all within a professional collaborative wrapper, if you will. So how do you move these two individuals in our example to that phase?
Yeah. So when I hear you say they need to be adults in the room, what I imagine it means that they must have trust and understanding of their particular roles, as opposed to trigger each other and get into a dramatic disagreement.
Yes, that would be accurate.
Yeah. What happens? And so, in order to do that, one is they need the framing. So they would need to hear from someone in your seat to say it is perfectly okay for you guys to have conflict, as long as it is within this paradigm. So to give people permission to disagree and then give them the tools. So when you hear so and so say we need to manage risk, that's appropriate. So ask them to explain that, and then make sure that you're able to hear the other and make sure you're able to speak in the other's language, at least understand it.
Mm.
But then the other piece is the triggering piece that often human beings trigger each other. And that is what every person has to be able to mind themselves. So when their amygdala goes off, they have to be able to say, that is my amygdala. It is not your fault. And that is often where the training lies
That's easier said than done.
for everyone.
Yeah.
Nature of the
Yeah, and
amygdala.
yeah, and I forget where I heard this. I either read it or a podcast, and they were basically talking about the amygdala, which is, as you said, the reptilian part of the brain that kicks in with like survival. Like, hey, something rustled in the bushes. Uh, my life could be under threat. I'm gonna get ready to fight or flight.
Mhm.
And then our neocortex in those moments, as I understand it, gets shut down. So it's like our forward thinking and executive function, all of that gets shut down. And I've had clients say, Emily, like, my brain turns off. I don't feel like myself when I can feel my heart pounding when, like, this trigger happens, and I'm like, "Yep, that's, like I think that's the effect of your neocortex shutting down." And so we wanna be able to fire that thing back up so you can think with your entire brain and bring your whole self to it. Um, ho like, that's like a intrinsic, like, very baseline primitive thing that happens though. So how do you get people to recognize that and then cycle out of that in the moment?
Yeah, the brain does not come with an owner's manual, right? It'd be really nice if it did. And that is actually part of what I show people about their structures. Right? So I often show them the brain. I point to the amygdala and to explain to them this is an actual thing. It's a physical thing you have. And it's actually part of our mammalian system. So the reptilian part is the danger, like there's sunlight, there's a danger, let's just scurry away. The amygdala is very sensitive to social threats. So anytime we have the risk of being excommunicated, not included in a group, being less than, that is when it goes off.
Yeah.
Because that is for mammals really important to be in clumps, because as mammals we're relatively weak, we don't survive. We need to be in a group. So that's the function of the amygdala, is to prevent us from straying too far so that we have the benefit of the group as a means of our survival. So,
Yeah.
so when that is threatened, that's when we get really jolted and we can't think straight. So I say all that because I explain that to my clients so that they can have some humor about this. So that once they understand it, they have a little bit of a balcony perspective of it. And then they would say, oh, my amygdala is going off now. How do you know? oh, I'm all tingly, I'm all wired up, like there's a part of me that's really ready to fight. And then once they have the language and once they're able to label their emotions, they're able to relax that part of the brain, and then the prefrontal cortex comes back online faster.
Yeah. It's so funny you mentioned that because, when I was first going to board meetings, I would have this, like, intense just, like I could hear my heart beating in my chest and in my ears, and I would get my temperature would rise, and I would feel like my shoulders go like this and tense up. And, I was working with my coach at the time, and we went through a whole series of discussions, but the funny part we came to, which was, like, my brain was going back into kind of caveman days saying, the competing tribe is coming at you with, like, spears and arrows, and they're flinging them at you, which is, like, a silly picture now because that's not happening, but that just kind of brought some levity and humor to it. And the interesting thing that was happening for me is I knew that my, like, physical survival was not in danger, but a lot of times people's identities get put in the place of your actual physical, like, bodily harm. So, like, if your identity and your image is under threat, that becomes like a survival trigger. And so for me, it was I would kind of, rub my fingers together, have a tactile sensation, and just say, I'm safe, I'm safe," in my head, and that would kind of cycle me out when I was having those first board meetings where it's like, "These are the leaders. These are the ones who can decide to excommunicate me, i.e. fire me from the tribe, from the company." So it was so interesting that you gave that example. Anything
100%.
else?
This is very common
Yeah.
what you're describing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm wondering if we move from like, okay, I'm a chief of staff, I'm mediating between two colleagues to I'm a chief of staff and my principal, let's say the CEO,
Mhm.
and I are having some sort of conflict where, there's natural conflict and things that happen within the bounds of any business relationship. And then there's like, this is kind of getting off the rails, and I'm not quite sure I can trust this person or talk to this person openly. How would you go about mediating that if you are one of the parties involved?
Yeah. So you want to resolve your own conflict and you're feeling some distrust.
Yes, and it's with your principal, so this is with your
Yeah.
boss.
Yeah. 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 So in this hypothetical, can you give me a little bit of context of what would cause the mistrust to occur? Like how would it go from a regular business disagreement to, like there's a problem?
Let's use the example of this person is not bringing the chief of staff, so it's not bringing me into the decisions, is kind of ostracizing me from the important meetings. I'm not aware of things going on. I'm kind of being regulated to the sidelines and just doing the minutia pieces. And it's like, hey, I'm here to be chief of staff. Tell me like what's happening. Why aren't we having deeper conversations?
Yeah. Okay. So this is, if I were coaching the chief of staff, here's what I would say. I would say, I am hearing that you expect to be invited to this meeting on Monday at 10, but you did not get that invitation. And then you would say to that,
Yes.
okay. And how do you know that that is intentional ostracism as opposed to anything else?
Mm, this is a one data point in a trend that I'm seeing where I used to be invited to these things. I used to be on email threads. I used to be uh, consulted and asked for my advice on things, and now those appear to be those are going away. Those are becoming fewer.
Got it. So there was a period of time when you felt closer in interactions. There were more asks of you by your principal. And then at some point you realized there were fewer. And this is an example of those fewer points.
Yes.
Okay. When did you first notice? And by the way, this is also, you can do this to yourself. This is just me guiding
Sure.
those experience. When did you first notice that this was an issue for you, that it mattered?
I would say, let's just say these things started happening like 2 months ago, and at first it was like one-offs here and there, and then when it became when I thought it became a trend, that's when it became meaningful to me because that's my role, and that's am I not doing a good job? Is there something wrong per se? So like let's just say about a month ago.
Great. Okay. So then I would say a month ago or now is a great time to bring up these observations to your principal and actually ask them for context. Because a lot of the stuff, the rest of this is meaning making, which could be true, but it could also not be true. What we know is true is there was a period of time when you were closer and you got more questions. And then at some point you noticed that was different. And one example of that is the fact that there's a Monday morning meeting that you didn't get invited to. I would
Yes, and to add further
yeah,
context,
please.
I had these conversations with my principal. I'm parroting what I've heard from
Oh,
many chiefs of staff
sure.
here, with my principal, and I asked about this, and uh, I feel like I'm getting a brush off answer, like, yeah, 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 like, no, 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 it's not that, everything's fine. I'm just, you're going to be off on this thing here, so it's kind of a brush off. But I feel over and over again that like, that's not quite the full story, and
Mhm,
they seem to be avoiding having this conversation. I'm
mhm,
trying to engage with them,
mhm.
and they're not reciprocating.
What were the questions that you asked? How did you have that discussion with the principal?
Uh, let's just say, I noticed that I wasn't invited to the meeting at Monday at 10, this one on Thursday, and then I got taken off of these couple email threads that I'm normally on,
Mhm.
and I was wondering, is there a reason for that?
Got it. Yeah. So notice how you didn't bring in your context, which was, I remember a time before when this didn't happen. And then now I noticed that it is happening. And I think that context is really important because it could be that, by the way, something is wrong and this person is just being either passive aggressive or just avoidant and trying to brush you off. Like it's totally possible. And I would probably say that there's some anxiety over speaking with you about this. And so there's some non-zero component of that piece of their avoidance. But I'm not sure that's 100% of the equation because part of this is your experience, how you've noticed something that's meaningful to you, and that is on its own important. Doesn't mean that there's anything bad happening. So I would have suggested that you say, here's what happened before for the past 6 months. This is my experience about how much contact we've had. And now I'm noting a shift. And I am curious. And the way I would say is I'm curious how much of that is circumstantial, like something nothing to do with me, versus how much of that is something to do with me. And let the person speak to that. And something to do, notice how I'm not saying, did I do anything wrong? Something to
Yeah,
do with me is an open question for them to then say, half of it is circumstantial and half of it is, I think, whatever. Maybe there's something I need
yeah,
you're not doing, or maybe your role's changing or whatever.
yes. No, so, like, your tips are provide context. I'm curious about X, Y, and Z. How much of this has to do with me, which is like hitting the nail on the head. And then, so let's say, like, people
And how much of it
go ahead.
doesn't? That's the other piece. And also say how much of it
Mm,
doesn't. Let them
how
have the
much of it
full
doesn't?
picture. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, no, no, thank you. And I mean, there's so many ways. Like, I always tell people, don't assume there's 100 different reasons. Maybe there's like a merger and acquisition, or maybe someone's leaving and they're prepping you, they're giving you deniability for something, and then they're going to bring you back in the fold in a bigger role. Like, I've seen this happen time and time again. Let's just say, for hypothetical purposes, that like this person, like the chief of staff, is picking up on something, and the principal, the CEO in this case, is just brushing them off. Is there a point at which it's like, this is unsolvable because they're my boss, they call the shots, and if they're unwilling to engage with me, then I don't have a leg to stand on in one respect.
So I would say that if you ask the question in this open-ended way, how much of it is having to do with me, how much of it nothing to do with me, that's a really good opportunity for your principal to say, this has nothing to do with you. So you're doing a great job. There are some things that are happening. Don't worry, stay put, and all will be revealed in due time, or some version thereof. In which
Yep.
case, you got the message. It's not you. Or the conversation could be, things are changing. I think maybe the role is shifting. I think maybe your skills will be used elsewhere or whatever else is going on, in which case you also are getting a message of something. So if the person is being shifty when you are being open, I think that is an indication to me that there's a red flag.
Yeah.
But you have to be
Yeah.
open first, and most people will be open with you. And it's also an opportunity to say, you can say, is there something that I need to be doing differently? Upskilling, shifting the way I'm approaching this. Like any person would say, thank you very much for asking. Yes, I would love for you to think bigger now as opposed to just tactical or something else like that. And that's a
Yeah.
conversation for changing what you do in your value add. And if the person is completely unwilling to speak about it, my guess honestly would be that they're looking to get out. And so they don't have
Mm.
time in their brain space for you, but not because of you, but because of them.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, I've seen that scenario too. And I think what you said highlights something else really important is a lot of times chiefs of staff have to coach their principal, and sometimes it's very meta where it's like I need to coach you on how to speak to me. And so being open, like you said, and transparent is like, here, let me just demonstrate, like let me go first type of thing. And then sometimes I found that when chiefs of staff give them like examples or like open the door, like, is it this? Or like, I know, could I be doing this differently in this type of meeting? Or is it this? That just opens the door where it's like, it's not, it's not quite that, but this, and this over here might be something that we can look at. And that just opens the door. So I love that you mentioned that. Just a few things as we wind down here. Um, how do you tell if it's productive tension or constructive tension versus, oh, this is off the rails? I mean, one of my things the tells is like if someone's personally attacking like someone's like person or like attributes, like we're not talking about the work or the project or how we showed up at the client meeting. It's you are a morally bad person.
Yeah, I think both people have to agree on what is in bounds and what is out of bounds, and that is sometimes dictated by company policies and laws, and sometimes it's a negotiation between people. So, for example, yeah, one person comes from a culture where slamming their fist on the desk is just a normal course of doing business, but another person finds that extremely frightening, even
Yep.
though there's no, the fist is going down onto the table, not at the
Sure.
right. So but that's an example of, hey, out of bounds for me. Like I am not comfortable speaking to you. Doesn't matter what the issues are with you being physical like that, and that then it's a point of consideration of if that's how you want to hear it, then I have to adjust. So that I would say having conversations like that. I mean, this is an extreme example, but it could be when the other person is triggered is when the problem is. Whoever is triggered, the other person, I would say, owes them some consideration to avoid triggering them as much as possible.
Okay. Is there any other tells to where like this is like, okay, as chief of staff, you're often sitting in team meetings where it's like part of this is good. Like let this conversation happen. It's
Yeah.
like people are kind of getting animated about it, but that's actually a good thing versus, okay, now it's gone out of bounds. I need to guide it back in bounds or call timeout. Hey, stop. Is there any other tells to look for with that?
So yeah, if people are getting shut down, and part of it is watching the room, and when someone gets
Yeah.
quiet, when one person gets overly aggressive or assertive, and that causes the other person to back away, that's a time to say, was that intentional, and what was going on there, and then maybe have a debrief afterwards and say, yeah, this did not go as planned in a negative way, and I'm using very diplomatic language, right? So this went off
Not go as planned. Yeah.
right. And so we don't want to have a repeat of that. So first, let's figure out, Alex, you raised your voice, Emily, and it caused Emily to not speak something. Alex, you owe her a conversation. And that's something that should be, that would be in the chief of staff role to say. So then Alex says, listen, didn't mean it. That was just, I got too passionate about so-and-so. And so then we have that. And by the time we have the next meeting, Emily and Alex are actually closer as coworkers because of that
Mhm.
men's conversation, rather than people are sitting kind of back and seeing what happens next. So I think that's part of the role. And then the other part is to overtly say it's okay for us to disagree, and I'm going to be the referee in my role here. So your job is to be passionate, and my job is to say out of bounds and blow the whistle. And if people agree on that, then that could also work.
Yeah. Well, back to your, like, American football example, when they throw the flags where there's
Yeah.
a penalty, it's kinda like, "Okay, like, you guys go at it, like, you guys go at it hard, and then I'll just throw a flag if, like, look, that argument has no basis in kind of what we're talking about here." Um, Before I forget, one question is, w w like, high-level guidelines on what you say in a group setting versus what you say afterward one-on-one. So it might be, like, at the group level, it's like, "Hey, like, just time out, we're gonna go in this direction," and then afterward, like, in the hallway or, the next day, you have that one-on-one conversation with the different participants.
Yeah. I would say avoid shaming people in a group setting.
Yep.
So I would not say at this point to Alex, you're out of line. Like,
Yeah.
like I would not say that. I would say, on the other hand, something like, I'm hearing this conversation, and I think we reached a heat level of 8, and I think we want to stop at a 7.5. So let's pause this and let's continue that. And that gives people the message like, okay, like that's a nice way of saying enough, cool off. And then
Yeah.
say, I noticed when that happened, you did this, and that is something we want to avoid in the future. Something like that. And that's a private conversation. So then people can save face and clear things up without being publicly shamed.
Right. What would you say in terms of avoiding conflicts? We've talked about like, hey, there's this good kind of conflict which you want to engage in. Are there times where it's like, you know what? Like, I feel like I want to give this person a piece of my mind, but right now is not the time. Right now is not the time to have that conversation.
Right. I'm not actually a big fan of avoiding, but I'm a fan of postponing. So I'm hearing you say.
Uh,
So
tomorrow.
tomorrow, right? Yeah. So you want to express, and I would also say, if you want to give someone a piece of your mind, I would not give them a piece of your mind. I would say, what is it you want? Deal with your drama internally, and then come out, say something when you actually have something curious to ask about what happened, or something that you want to explain that happened to you. And so I have a kind of a 4-step model of that: care, clarity, curiosity, and choice. So care means you have to remember there's a human being there, even though you disagree. Clarity is doing that internal work of saying, what am I solving for? What is my trigger? What do I really want? And that happens before the conversation. Curiosity is what happens at the conversation. So instead of giving a piece of your mind, you go in and saying, here's what happened on my side. What happened on your side?
Yeah.
And then choice is about, I want to offer the other person a chance to figure out how to help me rather than tell them what to do. I don't want to control. Just want to give them what the end point is. How would you reach a 10% risk-adjusted growth like that?
Gotcha. And the last thing I'll leave us with is hitting on something you mentioned earlier, which is that conflict and these even heated arguments can bring people closer together. And that's a huge piece because after you've kind of gone to battle, there is that sense of like, now we're somehow closer, which is like an interesting dynamic. So can you touch on that to wind us down here?
Yeah, as long as people understand, again, what they are doing, it's okay to battle as long as it's in the context of an ongoing positive relationship. And then also to make amends when things are heated. And I'll give you a perfect example. I was speaking to one of my closest lifetime friends. I've known each other for 45 years. And our discussion got heated, and I sort of said, you kidding? This is not so, et cetera. And this guy said, look, I'm sorry, I did not mean to upset you. And I really wasn't mad at him. I was just passionate about the discussion. But the fact that he actually said that what he showed is care toward me. And so that actually brought us closer, even after the 45 years, even closer, because like this guy, really like feels it and he cares about me. So that was a very happy ending to a discussion that was, if you'd hear it in the middle, would be very loud and boisterous.
Yeah. And I remember one time I was like, we're in this like group conversation and we were talking about like 24,000 something. I think it was dollars or conference attendees or something. I think it was $1 for a conference. And then this person at that like, it's going to be $1 million and $2 million, blah, blah. And we were like, what? Like, this is like totally. And I was like, let's call him Rob. Like, I was like, Rob, did you just say $1 million? He was like, that was just for dramatic effect. And everyone just started laughing. It's like, okay, we're not even talking in the realm, but laughing is a big one. It broke the ice.
Exactly. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. Got it. Perfect. Alex, you've shared so much, and I'm sure it's just tip of the iceberg for everything that you do in your body of work. If someone is listening is like, yes, I need to hear more from Alex, what are some resources or where can they reach out to you? What is the best place to connect with you?
Yeah. So go to conflictyes.com. And that is my website. There I have resources there. And you can also contact me, and I'll be happy to chat with you about ways that we can work together.
And do you work with individuals, with teams? Do you do workshops? What types of things do you offer?
I typically work with teams and organizations. But if an individual has a problem at work in the context of that, I'm happy to chat about that as well. And I offer trainings, group coaching, and individual one-on-one coaching, as well as, of course, conflict resolution for those emergencies.
Beautiful. So conflictyes.com. We'll have that in the show notes. Alex, thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you, Emily.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.